Presentation's about a hijacking that I had back in 1972, and this book was written by a professional writer, and he did a lot of research. When the book first came out and I heard about it, I thought, it's another skyjacking guy that's getting on the bandwagon, because skyjacking was in vogue back then. So I wouldn't even buy it. I went to the library and they got it for me. After reading the book, I'd say 95% of everything in the book is true. The other 5% I wasn't aware of. But in any case, we have an interesting character here. I'm going to give you a little background on him, because most guys that turn professional criminal, out of the ghetto, poor kid background, things went wrong for him. Well, this guy, things didn't go wrong till he was about 14 years old. His family was very prominent. He was born in Brockville, and the name of the town is Brockville. His mother's last name is Brock, so the town was named after the family. The father was an Annapolis grad, mother from the Bostonian money crowd, so he had a good start in life. He came from a family that had a very, very important military background. He has an uncle that's a 2-star general. His another uncle who is a 3-star admiral. If those Navy guys in here remember Patuxent, it's now called Trapnell Field, after his uncle. So I'll start with a little background on his growing up. He went to private schools. You talk about white privilege. He had it all till he was about 14. His mom and dad broke up, got divorced. Mom was an alcoholic, unfortunately. And dad got assigned to the Panama Canal. So he takes the boy down there and marries one of the ladies, and then proceeds to have a heart attack and die. So at 14, the new mother and the 14-year-old aren't getting along, so she throws him out on the street. So now you got this 14-year-old boy out on the street, stealing to eat and getting into trouble. And that pretty much begins his criminal life. He goes from there, joins the military at one point, just enlisted, because there's a family history of military success. While in the military, he ends up in a gun accident where he accidentally shoots himself. I don't know where, but so he gets released. He gets a medical discharge. Later on, he finds himself, he sort of views himself as an adventurer. So he goes down to Cuba and joins Castro's. He goes down to Cuba to try to join Castro's men, only he gets captured. So now he's in a prison down there. And this starts a long line of prison visits, because he kept getting caught and doing things that would put him in there. Very bright. His IQ was 133. And that's pretty much what got him in trouble. He thought he could outsmart everybody most of the time. During his lifetime, he netted over $1 million, sticking up banks and savings and loans and doing other things. And so that's pretty much how he lived. I'll back up a little bit. I may jump around a little bit here, because one thing leads to another, but there's not a direct connection. So there's just tons of stories. I was on TWA Flight 2, and at the time it didn't dawn on me, but 16 years before my incident, Flight 2 was a Connie, Lockheed Constellation, leaving LAX going to Kansas City. At the same time, United had I think it was a DC-7, and it was leaving. They left within 3 minutes of each other. This is 1956, and the United flight was going to Midway. Back then, there was no radar. It was just position reporting and checking in, and so some guy on the ground was kind of clicking you off as you passed points. They both ended up over the Grand Canyon, and most of you should remember this, and they collided. They hit each other, and everybody died. There's a memorial in the Grand Canyon where the accident happened. But anyway, that's Flight 2, TWA Flight 2. My flight was TWA Flight 2, so I didn't know the history of it, and wasn't paying much. But basically, that's a little bit of the background on Garrett Trapnell. Okay, now fast forward to January 28th, 1972. And I was in the habit of flying that flight because this particular flight, you all heard the term red eye. This was the Friday night red eye. So we'd go to Kennedy and lay over. I was born and raised on Long Island, so my mom still had a house there. So I'd just go out to her house on the layover and enjoy family. He got on the airplane at LAX. The metal detector was broken that night. He had a cast on his arm, and he had a gun inside the cast. So he gets on the airplane. Probably halfway across the United States, somewhere around Chicago, I think it was. He takes the cast off, takes the gun, puts it on our head flight attendant, says, "Take me to the cockpit." So she did. And here we are, middle of the night, over Chicago. No moon, it's dark, everything's dark, so you know how you dim the lights and just sit there. The captain was flying, and I think he might have been even dozing off at the time. So, and then all of a sudden, knock, knock, and you throw the switch, open the door, she comes in, he's got the gun, and for about the next 10 to 15 minutes, we were all terrified. He's waving it around, yelling commands, and you don't know what you have. Luckily, after a while, that kind of all simmered down. And he'd stuck up so many banks. Matter of fact, the FBI guy that shot him said he makes Willie Sutton look like an amateur. So he's waving a gun around and telling me, anyway, at the time, contact ATC and tell them who I am. He finally gets the mic, starts talking to ATC, and he says, "Call the FBI, they have a dossier on me." He'd stuck up so many banks, he knew how to control the crowd. And he basically calmed us down. I'm not gonna hurt you guys. I wanna get some money and blah, blah, blah. And he was very personal. Matter of fact, later on I realized we had a sociopath. This guy could charm you. If you met him, you'd invite him home to meet your sister. I'm serious. He could be that. He was well dressed, spoke well, and within 15, 20 minutes, everything was calm and cool in the cockpit. He spoke on the radio because he'd flown airplanes, so he knew how to handle communications. And as this goes on, he really controls the audience. He was on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted, and he was on the Mounties list as #1. So here I'll divert to how we got to that position. Well, let me go back a little bit. He runs out of money, and the first time he does a criminal act that would put him in jail, his family, he sticks up a savings and loan. because he needs money. He gets caught. The family gets a high-priced lawyer, runs him into the case, and the lawyer says, Gary, 20 years, or you had a medical problem in the Army? Yeah. Maybe we'll do temporary insanity. They win the temporary insanity. And therein starts a whole lifetime of his excuse for everything, temporary insanity, schizophrenia. And he creates this alter ego, Greg Ross. So whenever he gets caught, well, Greg Ross did it. I didn't. At the trial, they brought in like, at least 10 psychiatrists in different states that said, yeah, he's a schizophrenic. But every time he goes into an institution, he sits around, he watches the other schizophrenics, and he reads their books. At one time later on, he says, I know more about schizophrenia than any of those doctors. And he knows all the habits and how they act. And he pulls it off, and he just keeps convincing everybody, Greg Ross did it, I didn't do it. So, the Canadian Mounties #1 position. He goes up there, and he and another guy stick up a total of 7 banks over a period of time. And the Canadian Mounties never caught him. So naturally, he keeps moving up the ladder to #1. At one point, after they rob a bank, they come across the border, it's in New York, and the New York State Police picked him up for some infraction. Excuse me. And they turn him over to the Mounties. Well, the Mounties are thrilled to get him. So they put him in a brand new high security prison, and he escapes. There's nothing above 1, so he's really at #1 now. And they never did get him back. Now the guy he stuck up the banks with, I have to go back and tell you how he met him. He's living in LA, and he's a con man. And he goes, and there's a go-go dancing place that he frequents, and here's this gal dancing, she's pretty nice. So he starts talking to her, and next thing he knows how much money she's making. He said, wow. So he asks her to go to Las Vegas for a weekend with him. And she does. And he sees all these credit cards that she has. So while they're there, he says, why don't we get married? So she says yes. They're coming out of the courthouse, and she says, now that we're married, blah, 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 blah. And he's thinking, she thinks we're married. We just went and got a piece of paper. So now he cons her into letting him use all her credit cards. So what does he do? He starts taking flying lessons. So he's also sort of paranoid about FBI behind every tree and pole. And periodically during his crime career, he feels like everything's closing in, and then he splits. So he goes down to Orange County Airport with 14 hours flying time, takes an airplane, and flies it to the Bahamas. And his attitude was, Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic all by himself. I can make the 45 miles over to the Bahamas. And so now he's over in the Bahamas with her credit cards. So he's in a bar, and he gets into a fight with this guy called George Padilla, who's the guy that was his accomplice sticking up all the banks in Canada. So he and George, after a little wrestling match, start laughing about the whole thing. They become asshole buddies. So now they're drinking and carousing and having a good time. And Gary says, oh, he was in the Emeralds of Columbia, and he was looking at some jewelry. And he used one of her credit cards to buy something. And this woman checks it. They say, don't, nix it. It's not any good. It's been stolen. So she gives him a bad verbal beating over this. And he's driving away thinking, all those jewels, all that jewelry. So he talks to George Padilla, says, I'd like to go in there and take some of that stuff. So they go back and rob Emeralds of Columbia. Get out, get in the car, drive to the airport. The John Dom, he can hear sirens and things starting to crop up. They get in his airplane, no tower clearance, nothing, just taxis out and takes off with the tower screaming at him. So now they're going to go back to Florida. This is how sharp he is. What, 45 miles across? Within that period of time, he calls a rental agency, gets a car, rental car waiting for him, and instead of going to a major airport, he picks out a little dirt or grass strip and goes out there. They land, jump in his or they landed where he parked his airplane, jumped in his airplane and went to LA, fetched the jewels, and he and George Padilla over a number of years become buddies. And every time either one of them runs out of money, hey George, what do you say we go to Canada, get some more? One robbery, they're coming out of Canada and they get into the northern part of New York, where they check into a motel and they got all this money, so they're out raising hell. They meet two gals and they're all getting kind of friendly. They bring the two gals back to the motel and the gals see all this money laying around and some guns. And they go, what's this all about? Oh, he says, we're in the banking business. We transfer funds between banks and we need the guns to protect the money. Okay. He can whip up a story in just a flick of an eye. And he's very creative. Matter of fact, one of the robberies, one of the first robberies, he told George to stand out front and don't let anybody in the door. Well, he's standing out front. I'm not sure of this guy's IQ. He's standing out front and a guy with an ice cream cart comes along and parks next to him, and all these people start coming up to buy ice creams. So George is out there, he's got all these people eating ice creams, and the ice cream guy is selling it, and of course they're looking into the bank. So George rounds everybody up and brings them into the bank while the bank robbery's going on. There's so many stories in this book that I'll never get to with this presentation, but these two guys, especially Gary, he's a character, he's a sociopath, and you wonder, with that upbringing, everything turned south at the age of 14. Let me go back to the actual hijacking. Again, he's in control. It's nighttime, and he has a gun. I think it was a Ruther. He's talking to, he's controlling everything. He's controlling us. He's controlling ATC. Go talk to the FBI. They got a dossier on me. So now we get to Kennedy, and what he wanted was, he wanted a ransom. Odd number, $306,000. When he was living in Florida, he had a boat, and there was a legal argument between the people who owned the boat, or he thought he owned the boat, and they thought they owned the boat. Goes before a judge, and a judge awarded the other party custody of the boat. So the boat was worth about $306,000, and he thought he was robbed of that amount of money, and that was his reason for that number for ransom. He wanted ransom, and he wanted to be taken outside the United States to a country who would take him. He never said what the country would be, but I think he would take anybody to take him. While all this is going on, he also asks for Angela Davis. Remember her? Yeah. Apparently, I didn't know it, but she was the revolutionary queen of these kind of guys. They worshipped her. So he said, I want her released from prison. And that was pretty much the last we heard of that demand. He never brought it up again. but it sure created a buzz in the FBI and the people looking for him. Got to Kennedy, kept making his demands. We flew around till we're running out of fuel, and then requested more fuel for exchange of passengers. So we landed at Kennedy Airport, and we parked on the very, southeast end of 4 left. There's pictures of Kennedy, there's Jepsons out there. So 4 left is one of the runways which goes out into Canarsie Bay. And you're kind of surrounded by Canarsie Bay. So we land, the temperature is about 25, the wind's blowing at about 20 knots. It's freezing out there. And we get the passengers off and get fuel on board. And I'll tell you, the time I was the most scared, we were all pretty calm by now. The time I was the most scared was on the ground. I'm looking out the window, and these refuelers and the people that are hanging around down there, they're so casual, you would think absolutely nothing's going on. And then I look out the window over to the left, and there's 2 guys sitting in a little small boat fishing. It's 25 degrees with a 20-knot wind. You know, and so you really, I just really felt they were all half of these guys around the airplane are FBI, and they want him, and I'm going to be collateral damage if, you know, when they come in. So that was really the scariest part of the whole trip. As we're getting people off the airplane, and this was classic, a little old lady refused to leave the airplane. She said, "I've waited a long time for this trip, and I bought all brand new luggage, and I'm not leaving without my luggage." Lady, you don't understand. We finally got her off. We got the fuel. Now, we're sitting while we're sitting there on one frequency, we're talking to the FBI, ATC, TWA Vice President Frankham. We're talking to his lawyer down in Miami, and TWA agrees to fly him up because he's going to help negotiate. And then all of a sudden, we're talking to the Dallas County Jail. That's where George Padilla ended up that day. So he's thinking of maybe we'll fly there and get him out of jail. While all this is going on, of course, we've closed the airport, and now we're about 6 a.m. in the morning. We're on 4 left. There's a TWA 707 charter on 13 right wanting to take off. It's the news charter that was going to China just before Nixon's flight. You remember when Nixon went over there and opened up China communicating? That was the charter, and of course we've got him blocked. He can't take off. So the TWA terminal is full of all the New York press. Because what else is going on a Saturday morning on a cold January? So the TV people, the news people, just the terminal's just full of news people. Of course, this is a big deal, the charter. There's a kid walking around with a $15 receiver, radio, and he's plugged in, and a reporter goes by and he says, "What do you listen to?" He says, "I'm listening to the hijacking." He's plugged into the tower and he hears all of us talking on the radio. Now, remember, all these people are on one frequency. And there's times when we just took the headsets off and threw them down because nothing was making, it was chaos. So he says, "What are you listening to?" He says, "The tower and the hijacking." So the reporter says, and by the way, he was from CBS. He says, "I'll give you $50 for that." Oh, sure. So now we got the press at the terminal listening to all this over the radio. Let me step back and give you a situational thing. In the cockpit, and there's pictures out there, there's 4 seats. So the captain's in the front left, I'm in the front right, and the engineer is sitting facing his panel. And Gary is in the jump seat. Now, Gary and I were pretty close in age at that time, about 35. And he wouldn't let the captain turn around, and he wouldn't let the engineer turn around. But I was caddy corner, I'm over here. I'm the furthest one away from him, so I'm the least threat. And I found that I could just kind of, not turn, but just cock my head, and I had eye contact with him. So he and I were doing most of the communication in the cockpit and talking. And these guys couldn't turn around, so they had no information about what was going on. Matter of fact, after we took off, at one point, Gary got annoyed that they were ignoring his demands. And he says, if you don't hurry up and get me what I want, I'll crash this airplane into the TWA terminal. And of course, I turned around and looked at him going, and he says, and so I start giggling. I start to laugh. Well, you can imagine what these 2 guys think of me at this time. I'm over the hill and I've lost it. And so there's a lot of funny situations that cropped up when you can't see your threat. During this time, and so I ended up doing most of the talking on the radio. Mainly because now we had a little rapport. And matter of fact, I cracked a few jokes and just to take the edge off it. My wife's here in Poway. We'd only moved to Poway we were here about a year. No, we were only here, about half a year. And the chief pilot from TWA at LAX calls her and says, your husband's been hijacked, but I don't know any more information than that. But if you tune into CBS, KNX up in LA, you can hear it all. So she's sitting in Poway, listening to the radio, hearing me talk on the end of the runway at Kennedy. By the way, after that particular experience, they passed another reg and a law saying that'll never happen again. But it was ironic. But you know what? She says, well, I know he's still alive. I can hear him. We took off again. After we got the passengers off, we got fuel, and we're flying around waiting for the so-called negotiations that were supposed to be happening. And at one point, he says to me, I think I'd like to go to Dallas and get my George Padilla out of jail. Why don't we tell him we're going to Dallas? Well, being a co-pilot, I had the flight log, so I just kind of messed around for a moment or two and said, we don't have enough fuel to get to Dallas. We'll have to make another fuel stop, which wasn't true. But I was just thinking of things to do to kind of trip them up and make them. So he thinks about that and decides, well, I know what Kennedy's like, and I know where I can sit out on the end of that runway, and that's safe. If I go into any other airport en route to Dallas, it's all unknowns. And not only that, they'll have a battalion of guys on the ground waiting for me. So we land back at Kennedy, and by this time, it's like 8 in the morning, 9 in the morning. And we finally convince them. Matter of fact, at one point I said, if you don't accept the crew exchange, we've been up all night. You're gonna be sitting there with the gun over 3 guys that are sound asleep. So he accepted a crew exchange. And they said, we'll send you out a new crew, fresh, and they'll take you anywhere you wanna go. Well, they sent out 4 guys in uniform. They rolled up, those mobile stairs that you can roll up to the airplane. I recognized 2, but I didn't recognize the other two. And Gary decided, since we had this little thing going, that I would be the one to go out and search him. So I get out of the seat and I'm standing at the front door, and he tells them all to take their coats off by the time they get to the top of the stairs, so that they're in shirt sleeves and they can see that they don't have any guns. So I got the first three in. They would open their flight kits and I'd take a look, not hoping not to find anything, and throw the flight kit over here. And we had a little table and setup over here on that particular 707. So I'd take their coats, throw them up on a counter, and then he'd have them go sit down here where he could see them. So he's in the cockpit, like with 1 foot in, 1 foot out, gun in the left hand, and he covers them and then where they were sitting. The fourth guy up the stairs, didn't recognize him. He was wearing 4 stripes, captain's bars, and he looked a little young to be a captain. And I go to grab his coat. He's holding it out like this. I go to grab his coat. He had his hand in the pocket on a .38. Now Gary's behind me with a gun, and the FBI agent saw this. He was going to let the gun go. By the way, there was one of the other guys that I let in, had one in his sock. So I grabbed the coat, and unbeknownst to me, Gary heard something on the speaker system in the cockpit, and he turns his head just for a moment like that. The exact moment I pulled the coat, the FBI held on to the gun. I took the coat, threw it up here, and I'm standing looking at a guy with a gun, and the other gun's right behind me. I'm the thing that's in between, and he steps towards me, and so I instinctively moved to the left. His gun hand came up here, and I could see the flashes coming out. So he fires. Luckily, he hit Gary 2 or 3 times, and Gary never got a shot off. That terminated the incident. Well, when he started shooting, I dove out the door, down the stairs, and I have no idea why, but about halfway down the stairs, I stopped because there was no shooting anymore. And I turned around, and this little flight attendant, Connie, who had been interacting with us, getting us coffee and stuff like that, she's coming out the door, and she got airborne. I mean, all of a sudden, I got a flying flight attendant heading my way. And luckily, she was a petite thing. And so I turned around, I caught her, and we both ran underneath the airplane and waited for us to be invited back in. But let me hit a few things that from that point, the crew, we went to the hangar and got debriefed. Now, being a native of Long Island, I still had a couple brothers out there. One brother had a bar, and so he's in on this by now because my wife called him. So after we got done with the feds, I called him. His name's George. He shows up in a sports car. I'm standing outside the hangar, and I go, he hits the brakes, screeches up. I get in. He's got a pitcher like this of chilled martinis and a glass. Now his bar's only 20 minutes away, but I think I was probably drunk by the time I got to the bar. And it was sweet tasting because all that time with this hijacker. You would think the story would stop there, but it went on to the trial. And during the trial, I get familiar again with the FBI guy that was shooting. Matter of fact, there's funny little things that occurred. I said to him, I said, it says here you fired 4 times. I only remember you firing 3. He looked at me and he says, yeah, that's funny. I only remember firing 3. He says, by the way, I actually thought you searched me down at the bottom of the stairs and not at the top. So you can see how during periods of excitement, you can come away with a different idea of what happened. The trial, there was a little white-haired old lady on the jury. You know, they're not criminals, they're just misguided boys. Wouldn't vote for, the charge of course was hijacking and all kinds of, a few others. She voted no. And then she got in a peeing contest with the judge, who was I think he was the cousin of Judge Roy Bean, you know, and it ended up in a mistrial. So now we had to do it all over again. I'm going to jump back a little bit. When he, at one point where, by the way, every time he gets caught, he goes into a funny farm for a year, then starts acting normal, and they let him walk. So this is going on for many years, and many psychiatrists. Now he's got a record of it. You know, once you got a record, that you use that as evidence. So between the first trial and the second trial, lots of press. There's some press clippings over there. He's in the funny farm and he's thinking, you know, when I get out, I ought to try something legitimate. And by the way, every once in a while he'd go legitimate. And at one point he got into training guard dogs because he liked the dogs. And each time he started a business, it really prospered. He made a lot of money. Matter of fact, I'll get to that one later. He's getting out of the funny farm at this point, and he's thinking, well, why don't I wonder if one of the magazines would like to do a story on a bank robber. So he contacts Argosy. Do you remember Argosy? That men's magazine back in the 60s, 70s? He contacts them and says, hey, how would you guys like to do an article or a series on a real hijacker? And no, I'd say he hadn't hijacked at this time, on bank robber. So they don't believe him, but they said, what can we lose? So they send out a little cub reporter, a guy named Cy, with a little tape recorder. And Gary checks into the New Yorker hotel and has a suite. And Cy goes over, and Cy turns out to be an extremely good interviewer and got Gary talking about everything, where he admits that, he says, well, I know more about psychiatry than all those docs, you know, I've seen so much of it. He says, and I've got this history of temporary insanity. And he quotes the law book back in England, Norton versus McNorton, how he uses the law to not ever go to prison. And at one point during the conversation, he says, I can go out here in the street in New York and shoot 10 people and I'll never go to prison for it. Click. They gave us that tape. That tape went into the second trial, and that's what put him away, his own words, because he admitted everything. And by the way, he skipped out on the hotel bill. Classic Gary. Let me just check my notes. Oh, those two uncles of his that I mentioned. One uncle was a World War II hero, the Bataan Death March survivor, and went on to become a lieutenant general. And the other uncle was Admiral Garrett Trapnell, and he's the one, he ended up with 3 stars. During World War II, he was instrumental and up at the point of the spear on picking and designing the fighter planes for the U.S. Navy. And that's why Patuxent now is called Trapnell Field. I'll be hitting little points here that I missed, and that I'll go back to. Alcatraz closed, and you remember at Alcatraz there was the Birdman of Alcatraz. When it closed, they sent all those prisoners to Merriam Prison in southern Illinois. It's about 120 miles southeast of St. Louis. So not only the Birdman went to Alcatraz, but so did Gary. Matter of fact, John Gotti was in there too. And at Alcatraz, the meanest guy in there with the worst reputation got a nickname. They called him the Boogeyman. So the Birdman of Alcatraz was the Boogeyman when he was at Alcatraz, and he continued to be the Boogeyman when he went to Merriam. Well, just to give you an idea, he was the first. After him, another guy took his place after he died and became the Boogeyman. And after he died, Gary was the Boogeyman. Now, again, you may think all this is over. Well, I was at home one day when Gary was at Leavenworth, and the phone rings, and a friend of mine says, "Quick, go to KPP, anyway, one of the TV channels," and I turned it on, and there's Dan Rather at Leavenworth talking to a whole crowd of prisoners, and the guy up front standing there is Gary, always the leader. And Rather says things like, I understand that you guys are always trying to break out of here. And Gary says, yeah, it's what we do. He says, you put us in, we try to break out. And so he says, Gary, what's your plans? And Gary says, Dan, when are you going to air this show? He says, probably November. I won't be here by then. Now that sets me up for telling you what he did when he got to Merriam. Remember, I don't think I mentioned it, but he was married about 6 times. He believed in marriage. He didn't know there was a word called divorce, so he never divorced any of them. But he was brought up correct, so he believed in marriage, right? And he had lots of girlfriends. A woman that he befriended hires a helicopter in St. Louis under the excuse we're going to go look at real estate. They get airborne, and she pulls a gun on them. We're going to Merriam. The pilot's an ex-Army pilot, and she explains what we're going to do. We're going to go in and get Gary, and Gary had a buddy he thought he'd bring out too. So they were going to go into Merriam prison and extract Gary and his buddy. You know all the movies you've seen where there's an attempt to fly a helicopter in and do this? All those movies are based on Gary. They're going into the prison yard. The helicopter pilot realizes that there's a bunch of guys down there with guns, and they're going to think I am one of the bad guys. So on the way in, he fights with her, trying to fly the airplane. They said the helicopter was going all over the place. At one point, they thought it was going to crash into the guard tower. He gets the gun and is getting ready to land. And I don't know what her IQ was, but she says, "Oh, that's okay. I have another one in my purse." Whereby he blows her. He shoots her in the head and kills her. They land. Gary and his buddy are running across the yard thinking, hey, we're going to be out of here in a few minutes. That terminates that particular effort. Then about 7 months later, this woman's daughter, 17 years old, hijacks another one of our airplanes. Wants Gary out of it. Well, that terminated. They finally talked her out of that. But that's why Gary ended up being the third guy to become the boogeyman. And by the way, at this point, when you do things like that and they don't trust you anymore, they go down into underneath the prison. There was a section down there where you pretty much put away, you'll never see the light of day. And there were 3 guys down there. Gary was one of them. He was a chain smoker and died at 55 years old from emphysema. Let's see what I missed. At the prisoners, after this, of course, a lot of interviews, what have you, they said he was really a fun guy, joking all the time, always had a smile on his face. There's a picture of him over there on the counter. Like I said, he had 133 IQ, so, and his mind was always going. These are just extraneous little facts. John Hinckley, you remember the one that shot Reagan? When they went back to his room where he was staying, The Fox is Crazy 2 was on the table. So here's his training book for how to fake schizophrenia. And guess what? He got off on schizophrenia, temporary insanity. That's pretty much about it. And I'd probably think of other stories associated with him. If you ask some questions, it'll lead me. John.
Did you ever date his sister?
No, never met her. Anybody else?
How did Gary survive 3 gunshot wounds at close range?
38.
At 38, and he got hit in the shoulder and the arm, and 1 ricocheted off his hand. CJ?
I think they'd appreciate if you let them know the rapport that you had with Gary and what transpired after that. Years later, you
Oh,
found
yeah.
out about it.
I was up in San Fran one time, and I tripped over a FBI agent, and we got talking. I told him about Gary, and he says, "Oh, I remember that." He says, "You know, he used to send you Christmas cards." And I said, "I never got any Christmas cards." He says, "Well, the prison doesn't let them leave the prison." But it's nice to know he remembered me. Any other questions? Yeah, Vic?
How much time elapsed from when this whole incident started, when he pulled the gun and got in the cockpit, and you made it down the stairways underneath the aircraft?
9 hours. So I got to, matter of fact, I thought about this a lot. After a while, we were friendly. So you know the Stockholm syndrome. But we got real friendly because I thought it was these guys that were going to hurt me all around the airplane with guns. And I was afraid of the 2 guys out in the fishing boat. I mean, it was a real small fishing boat. 25 degrees, 20-knot wind blowing, these 2 guys with poles. Dan.
Well, at the time, your duty day was extended. Did TWA have duty rig at that time?
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yes.
I went, my brother picked me up, we went to his bar, and a lot of drinking, and I got a call the next day. Crew schedule, we have a flight for you. And I got to thinking about it, and I said, "No, you don't have a flight for me." Apparently, he wasn't on duty when it all happened, so he didn't know anything. But he wanted me to go out to the airport right away and go fly.
You said there was four replacement guys that came up there with uniforms. Was it 2 real pilots and 2 FBI, or
Yes.
3 crew? Okay.
Yeah, the 2 guys I recognized were from management, and the other 2, I didn't know who they were, and they turned out to be the 2 FBI agents. And I think I mentioned the one that was sitting over in a chair still had his gun in his sock. Mike?
Tell about when they didn't believe he was loaded with.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You remember I said we were all on one frequency, and there was that psychiatrist from Dallas He wrote a book called Skyjacker. So he now thinks he knows everything about all skyjacking. And they got him on the phone. He was on that frequency with us. And at one point, and by the way, he was a hindrance to everything that was going on. We could have really done without him. At one point, he doesn't know Gary's listening. He says, oh, a lot of the hijackers, they're just empty guns. They don't even have any bullets. So I turn around to look at Gary, and he goes, really shiny ones, too. Any other questions? Gary?
Hank, when the fourth guy came up, it was FBI, the whole success seemed to hinge on the fact that Gary was distracted at that fortuitous moment. Do you think that was coordinated, a radio call to the cockpit on the speaker?
No.
That was just accident?
Just an accident.
Okay.
Yeah. And, you've all heard, right? Flying is hours and hours of boredom interrupted by moments of stark terror, right? So I got my one.
Yeah, Hank, with your more or less pivotal role in the whole story there, how much are you featured in the book?
Oh, he mentions my name once. I'm glad you brought that up. No, there's a reason for this.
Time for you to write a book.
It's a good book, and it's really there's a lot more things he did in life that are in there, but it's such a shame that Elliot Asanoff never contacted any one of the crew. I'm in the phone book. He could have reached me anytime. I've got 9 hours of a really small amount of the hijacking because he didn't talk to us. I think if he'd have reached me, I could have made this book a lot more popular. But he just briefly mentions my name and involved in but not a lot.
Hank, there's a lot of airline people here with us today, as there usually are. So I've got to ask you a personal question that has to do with airline life.
This meeting's over.
And we're off today. So, airline pilots get to be experts in what they carry in their suitcase. I mean, you gotta carry a little suitcase, you can't pack too much of anything. Was that the design to, was your trip going to be ending when this particular flight reached Kennedy?
No, it was almost a 2-day layover. That's why I used to fly it, because I'd have 2 days with my family.
Right.
No, I had to return. The return flight, I forget the number of it, but flight 2, it might have been flight 1 going the other way. I don't remember.
Well, the reason I ask this question, if I went on a 4-day trip, I packed 4 pairs of underwear. I'd like to know, after this hijacking, what you did for that.
Well, he would have had to change at least one.
I think that's the point I'm trying to make. How did you handle that particular, I mean, if I'd been there.
I'm going to disappoint you. Remember, my brother had a house. My mom had a house. I had an apartment at her house with plenty of underwear.
How much of this did your wife hear?
She only heard what was going on the radio. So if nobody's talking on the radio, she was in the dark. But that frequency was being transmitted over the airways, but via KNX in LA. At least she knew I was alive.
I just thought when the shooting started, it was you in the middle of the FBI guy and the hijacker behind you. But then there was a pilot still in the left seat behind him.
Yeah, the captain was still in the left seat. Yeah, and that's why he positioned himself in the doorway at that point, so he could keep the gun on those 2 guys. And remember, he's standing in a cockpit, sort of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, so he could cover the scene here where I was, and also cover the 2 guys back here.
Lucky the pilot and the flight engineer didn't get shot too. Bullets flying around.
They were still learning their craft in those days.
Oh, that's interesting. Ju- the FBI, his name was Jim Nelson. And at the trial, I said, Jim, why did you only fire 4 bolts? Why didn't you just empty the gun into him? You know, we wouldn't have to go through this trial. And he looked at me, he said, Hank, I'm kind of new at this. That was my first shooting.
Did any of the bullets go into the panel?
Yeah, did some damage to the, yeah, there was a little, I don't know how much, but
So maybe the captain had to change his underwear too.
chances that, yeah, I knew what was going on. He didn't. And when he heard the gunshots, he might have had to change.
Do you have any idea what caliber the handgun was?
38.
38, yeah. Gary, from the
No,
FBI guy?
no.
They started carrying 40s at one point.
Anybody else with a question?
Guy hit him where he was aiming.
Say again?
Did the FBI hit him where he was aiming? Was he particularly?
I think he hit him where the parts that he could see, because he was sort of half in the door, you know, half in the cockpit, half out. So the only thing he had to shoot at was his left side.
In Gary's long criminal career, had he ever discharged a firearm at another person, or just waved it around?
You know, that question never came up. I don't recall any stories where he actually fired, but there were stories about him maybe being involved in a few other things that might have involved somebody getting killed. But those are just stories. I can't see you guys in the dark back there, so I can't see if you're holding your hand up.
Base back there.
Yeah.
The lady in the helicopter, her daughter hijacked another airplane. Why did her daughter feel like she had to get involved with her mother's boyfriend?
Never met her. I have no idea. She had, she said she had dynamite on and a bomb. And eventually I think she just got fatigued and tired, turned out it wasn't a bomb. And a bunch of negotiators talked her out of continuing. Any other questions?
Hank,
Yes?
2 things. You had said earlier that you were concerned when you saw all the law enforcement that you were going to get caught in the middle. And that's exactly what happened, literally. Cop here, you, and crazy guy.
Yeah. I just wanted to get those guys on and get my ass off.
I was married to someone in law enforcement for a while. And there were a lot of women who would have a police radio in the house and they would listen when their husband would go on duty. I never wanted to do that. I didn't want it. How did your wife hold up during this time while she was listening in and help us over here? Was she okay?
Well, as soon as it was over, I called her. So, you know, the period of time that she thought the hijacking was still going on was maybe an hour.
Bless her heart.
How many passengers were still on the airplane
None.
at the time? Oh, they don't.
We exchanged passengers for the fuel, and then we got airborne again. Yes?
What were the conditions that he wanted eventually, that he was demanding?
He wanted a ransom of $306,000. What he thought was the price of the boat that this judge took away from him. He wanted to then leave the country and have a country that would accept him and not extradite him back. And he threw Angela Davis in there just to stir a pot. Any other questions?
Yeah, who's Angela Davis?
God, you missed the whole 60s, didn't you?
Did Gary really have a sister?
No. I think he was the only child. But you'd have liked her. Any other? Don't worry, it doesn't matter how how silly it may sound, I probably have a story here for it. Well, if there's, yes.
My brother-in-law was also in law enforcement, was an undercover agent with the SDS and was a bodyguard for Angela Davis when she spoke at San Diego.
Oh, I do have another story. Yeah, I missed this one. You remember I told you Gary used to, when he'd go legit, he ran a couple of times, guard dogs, where back in like Baltimore area, he'd go out to guys, there's a lot of mischief going on in those days, you know, gangs and people fighting in the streets. And so he would train the guard dogs and then drop them off like at 6 o'clock in the evening, and some guy put a couple of the dogs in the warehouse and let them roam the warehouse all night. And anybody break in, the dogs would go for him. So that was his project. So he created a company doing that back east, I think in one of the South Carolina. And then he created a company out here in LA at one point. So now he's in Marion prison. And you remember the Sharon Tate murders?
Oh, yeah.
They find out that he used to drop guard dogs off at their house. So they fly him out to LA. He was going to testify at some trial. And I don't have it here, it's up there. It's an article in the newspaper that the FBI arrested some woman because she was operating on the outside while Gary was operating on the inside in a jail here in LA. She was going, with two other guys, they were going to kidnap a diplomat from, there's about 6 countries there. I'm not sure which country they were finally going to, but they were going to kidnap a diplomat and hold him for ransom to get Gary out of prison here while he was out here. He was very creative, resourceful. Every time he went legit, he made a lot of money. But then he was a sociopath, so, you know, God knows what was going through his head all the time. But can you imagine 14 hours flying time, he flew this light airplane all the way to the Bahamas? Dan?
Do you have any other interaction with the Trapnell family?
No. Oh, yeah. Side story. Dan and I were out at the Dalians when it was out here at the Miramar Officers Club. And the speaker that day was the son of Fred Trapnell and his daughter, right? Yeah.
And I was there and you asked her the question. She knew Jerry.
Anyway.
Did that old lady get her luggage back?
I'm sure she did. She would have demanded it.
What happened to the 6 wives?
Believe it or not, at one point, I got word that one of his daughters was living in Escondido. I don't know. I don't know how many children he had either, but I think he had about at least 3 or 4. Fred Trapnell.
Did they ever try to get you for a movie?
No. When we sat in, you remember he wrote a book on his dad.
Yeah.
And I went up afterwards and asked him if the family ever had a nephew or something named Gary. And with the look on his face, I actually called it off right there and thought, I'm not going to embarrass this guy, you know. So I went home, researched it, and it was the Trapnell family. Because you look around, I've never seen another Trapnell. It's not a common name. But the family had a great military historical background. And he kind of thought he should live up to that. And since he was the black sheep, and the family kind of turned against him. Where's he going to get as much fun as they had, right? Go out and join the other side.
They acted TWA pay you overtime?
I was lucky to get a ride back home. Oh, yeah, good point. They didn't pay me overtime, but about a week or so later, they gave me a week off. So my wife and I went to Hawaii and stayed with some friends. I can't see back there. You're in the dark. Speak up.
Mention McDuck's River.
Yes? Yeah, I did.
What was his question?
He
He wanted to know if I mentioned Patuxent.
ended up dying in prison, emphysema, out in Illinois.
Yeah. When put downstairs in that prison, there were 3 guys down there, and it was have no human contact. That was the classification of those 3 guys. No human contact. So he died in prison. I told you he was a chain smoker, 55 years old. Anybody back there with a question? I can't see hands.
So who
Is-
was Angela Davis? I don't know.
She was an activist. She was part of the Students for Democratic Society and traveled the country, a black activist.
A revolutionary who went to prison.
Another crazy. Okay.
Who went to prison. That was his request, is to get her out.
With Abby Hoffman and the Chicago Senate.
I think she's a congressman right now.
I wouldn't doubt it.
All right, Hank, I'll ask the $64 question. 9 hours from when you started to the guy. Did he let you go to the bathroom?
Yeah. But once you get comfortable with somebody, I was cracking jokes just to kind of keep the terrorism down. Matter of fact, at one point he said to the flight attendant, "Go get him some coffee." And so she says, "How do you take your coffee, Hank?" And I went, "They tell me that coffee's really bad for your health. I've quit." But that's what kind of keeps the thing going.
Hank, do you ever, or did you ever after that, get together with the other members of the crew and kind of rehash what happened and
Yeah, at the trials.
at the trial?
Yeah, during the trial, if somebody's testifying, they won't let you in. They won't let you hear any of the testimony. Some of the rules they had. And so we had a lot of time to sit around, talk. What do you remember? What do you remember? And of course, the other 2 guys finally got to liking me again and didn't think I was crazy. But I was just in the cockpit, just in a location where I could turn my head and he didn't object to it. So I abused that for quite a bit. And then that's how we built up a rapport, and we were talking just like we are now. And like I said, Stockholm syndrome. Well, I'm sure you can't classify every case like that, but yeah, a little bit of that works in. And he didn't seem to be a threat. He made it clear that we were not going to get hurt if we just did what he told us to do.
Did TWA, after all that, interview you extensively to try to learn how they could better protect their planes and their pilots and crews, or did anything come out of it with a change of policy for the airline?
No. The night that he got on, remember, he had the cast and the gun inside the cast, and the metal detector was broken.
Did he know that, do you think, when he went on, or?
No,
No.
I don't think so.
Didn't it occur to them to talk to you and the other crew and just say, what can we do to prevent this in the future, or is there something better we can?
I'm sure they had big discussions, but nobody asked me a thing.
Well, hijacking was still pretty new then.
Yeah, it was.
See, they didn't get serious about it until a lot of people died.
Yeah, it was.
The first one started in '72.
This is when mine was in '72.
It's funny, is most of them
Yeah, right. He went down. He went down to fight with Castro. Which, by the way, that's kind of interesting. While he was a prisoner down there, he told us about, pretty terrifying. They'd march him out, put him up against the wall with a blindfold, and he'd see a bunch of guys with rifles, and then all he'd hear was click. Then they'd put him back in a cell. A couple days later, do the same thing. So, you know, he's pretty warped in a lot of ways.
Hey Hank, how much thought did you give to using the captain as a shield so you could
Believe me, my primary intent was to get these guys on so I could get off.
Did you ever think about jumping out the side window?
No, because he made sure we all had our seat belts on and tightened. That's why I didn't become a threat to him. He knew I would have had to go for the seat belt to move. I was going to.
One other question. That was the same year. Was that before or after the Southern Airways hijacking to Cuba? Remember where they had like that all-day saga where a Southern DC-9 got hijacked and they stopped in Orlando and then they went on to Havana? That was 1972 also, I believe.
I don't remember.
Remember if that was before or after your event? Because there was as you said, there was a rash of hijackings that.
Yeah, like I say, it was in vogue, you know.
Do you know anything about the one where the terrorists hijacked TWA flyover in the Mideast and the airplane burned out on them?
Yeah. It was a 727. It was a TWA 727, and it was running a shuttle between a couple of cities over there in Europe when they got on and hijacked it. The captain was an old flight engineer out of Kansas City.
I was on a schedule on a TWA flight back from Beirut or someplace like that, and I got a little task.
There was one funny thing happened on that particular hijacking. Do you remember they landed in Algeria for fuel? And they wanted fuel. And they wouldn't give them any fuel because they didn't have any money. They wanted cash. Well, they finally took the credit card of the senior flight attendant who was on the airplane and put all the cost of the gas on her credit card. That's the only way they're going to get gas. Yeah, back there.
I remember during that time going to Delhi, India, and the flight attendants, they do their shopping, and then they take their cockpit keys, if anybody has one, and they all take a dozen cockpit keys. That's really, really secure. One key would fit all the aircraft, very, very clean.
Yeah. Well, crew members sometimes do really strange and dumb things, like everybody else. Yeah, Mike?
You had a rapport with him when you were on the aircraft. Did you ever get to talk to him after?
No.
Any communication with
No. The last time I saw him, he was sitting on the floor having been shot. Again, I can't see back there, so if anybody's got a question, speak up. Yes?
Have you ever thought about having a reunion with your crew and your pilot crew and your flight attendant crew and just rehash all your thoughts?
Well, during the two trials, we had a lot of time sitting as a crew discussing all this, but nah, reunions, no. Any more?
What was the exact date of it again?
January 28th, 1972.
I thought you said January 28th, yeah, okay.
Matter of fact, on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday will be my 47th anniversary.
Oh, only a historian, he said that was 10 years before the Challenger, exactly. We all didn't know that. Thank you.
Well, you know, everybody says airline flying is boring. Not all the time.
Hey, when he got shot, do you recall him saying anything as he went down or making any sounds? Or
No.
Nothing?
No. It all happened so fast. I don't even, it may not have even seen the gun going off. My back was to him. he was behind me, and all I knew is I was between two guns. Out the door, right.
Thanks to your incident and others like it, we in the Air Force had to start carrying weapons.
Oh, really?
And we've had 2 or 3 that are crew members of Army after that.
I told you that he at one point wanted to go to Dallas to get George Padilla out of jail, because once he realized that he'd been up all night, and this was going to go on for a long time, the crew exchange another airplane that could take him somewhere, and it was that time frame that was pretty much the excuse that he accepted to get a crew exchange going and us out. But this writer's written about 10 or 12 books, and like I said, when I heard about it, I'm not going to buy this piece of junk, probably. So I went to the library, and they got it for me. And it's a fascinating read, because you just can't believe the things this guy did in those years between 14 and 35 when he was shot. Yes?
Whatever happened to his partner, Padilla, that was in that Dallas prison? Whatever happened to him?
He's probably still there. They weren't going to let him out.
Hank, looking back on it, he came up with these ideas like get Angela Davis, well, maybe we've got our Bud George and all that. Is your sense, looking back on it, that he really had a solid step-by-step plan when he went into this thing?
No, I don't think he did. He was much more an opportunist than I'll plan this out. Those bank holdups. He had no idea what was going to happen. And by the way, he's such a smooth talker. He's a con man. He'd get into these banks, get a hold of the manager, have some excuse to go into the manager's office to talk about something, and then con the manager to make sure nobody does anything out here. He didn't go out and pull a gun on everybody out here. He used the manager as his prop for controlling everything. Say things like, if you don't do what I tell you, I'm coming back and I'll find out where your family is. All of a sudden you're cooperative.
Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell for more upcoming videos. Thanks for watching.